Welcome to Hamburger Business Review, Season 2, Episode 9. I'm your host, Mike Merrill.
And I'm your host, Zach Rose. Today we have Cable Sasser, the co-founder of Portland, Oregon-based software company Panic. We're here to talk to Cable about a mural painted by a man named Wes Cook that was mounted to the wall of the McDonald's in Centralia, Washington. Cable told the story of this mural at XOXO 2024, an experimental festival for independent artists who live and work online.
I'm producer Chris Higgins, and I was actually in the audience for that talk. It was the highlight of XOXO for me, which is actually kind of saying a lot because it was a long weekend and a good one. After that talk, I was standing outside the venue, like on the steps, talking to people. And there was this moment that really sticks in my head because the talk was noteworthy, but this moment was actually sort of more noteworthy to me. I was just standing around, people were standing around, because the festival had kind of ended and it was sort of an after party. And Cable walks down the front steps of the venue carrying an object. I won't say what the object is. And all of a sudden, everybody kind of noticed that and started clapping and cheering. And I remember, Cable, you kind of turned around and you were like, what? Oh, hey. But you were like taking it to your car, right?
I had no idea how to process that moment. It was the most I've ever felt like I was in like a climax scene in an 80s movie or something. It was the genuine slow wave of applause. Like people close to me noticed
scattered and
the object. And I didn't know what to physically had no idea what to do. I'm kind of waving and smiling. It was an incredible moment, but it just short circuited my brain. I'll never forget it.
I mean, it was so noteworthy to me because it was like a standing ovation, but sort of better because we're not in the audience anymore. Like the thing is over. We're just out there, you know, and it's been a while. It's been maybe half an hour or whatever. And presumably tech breakdown happened. But anyway, I thought that was a really interesting human thing.
I'm glad you witnessed that because sometimes it feels like I dreamt it. So yeah.
Awesome. So we just wanted to bring you on the show to celebrate that moment and to talk about McDonald's.
Awesome. One of my favorite topics.
And just for some additional context, and maybe as a disclaimer, I did work for Cable for 10 years.
So
from 2003 to 2013.
A long time.
So in the context of this talk and the video that we're going to be discussing and trying not to spoil for anyone, I do want to mention that there was one day that I came to work and there was this giant sign in the office. And when I mean giant, I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 20 feet long.
It was really long.
4 feet high, 8 inches to a foot deep. It was metal, covered in grime, and it had all this sketchy wiring attached to it.
Yeah.
I'd never seen this sign before. It was two words I'd never seen put together. It just said in kind of this
scripty,
Newberry.
Newberry.
And if I remember, that was a department store chain that I'd never seen. So I was why is this here? This is strange. And so I guess, Cable, I want to say first, welcome to Hamburger Business Review.
Thank you so much
but
for
also,
having me.
what was the deal with that sign? Why did you bring it to the office?
It's like a prototype version of the story we're about to kind of go into, which is that there's this mall in Portland called Lloyd Center. It was a critical part of my youth and adulthood, and really saw it go through all phases of mall life. From its absolute peak when I was a kid, it was an actual outdoor mall, which is a strange choice for Portland, Oregon, but it was beautiful. Impeccable sort of mid-century vibes, this spiral staircase with this orange tiled fountain, just so many great moments. So that earliest phase of my life, that was Lloyd Center. And then sometime in the 90s, remodeled, enclosed in glass, huge food court put upstairs, sort of all the mid-century stuff disappeared, and it became kind of like a generic 90s mall. That was the high school era of Lloyd Center for me, which meant finding the ladder in the parking lot where you could climb onto the roof and kind of crawling out on the glass and looking down at the ice rink. And then there's this super tall sign for Meyer and Frank, which was a department store that we had here in the Northwest, that some friends and I just literally climbed up to the peak of it. Terrifying. Not recommended. I think of my son who is 15 years old. Please don't be like me. It was in the wind. It was just fully swaying left and right. Anyways, so there's that phase of my life. And then when we had our first kid, Joby, I remember going to the food court with him because there were ramps and he would run up and down the ramps. Anyways, this one place connected through multiple phases of my life. And then everything sort of started to turn sideways. Malls, challenging in the best of situations, but especially one that's sort of neglected and awkward and just bolted on and layers of parking and like just not a great situation. And so one day when I was driving through the really intense parking lot, which Mike, the next time you're in town, it's not getting better. I'll tell you that right now.
Wow.
I think the mall is about to be fully redeveloped and demolished, and they have entered the we are not going to do anything phase, and it is not great. But anyways, deep in the parking lot, facing this brick wall were two giant neon signs for the store called Newberry. And Newberry was, I think, a 5 and dime, like one of those stores that had like the lunch counter, but then also the pet department and like all this stuff. And I loved going there, and I loved going with my grandparents and my parents. And those signs, Newberry, long gone, but the signs somehow remained. And it was one of those things where you realize nothing lasts forever. These signs are going to get destroyed. Like this is just not going to work out. And so I emailed the Lloyd Center, I don't know, lloyd@center.com or whatever. And I was just like, hey, do you guys need these signs? And they're like, no, like if you slip a check for $100 through the office door on the top floor, you can just take them, but you make sure you use like a real person to get them off the wall. Cause we don't want any trouble or you to kill yourself or whatever. And I was like, done, sold. And so, reached out to security signs in town. They rolled up and disconnected it and took it to the office.
On your say so?
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Like didn't even remotely question. I didn't even have to put on a high-vis vest. There was no explanation here, and they just gave me the signs. And so, yeah, Mike, unfortunately, has prior experience of the adventures of
Cable, do you remember to whom you wrote the check?
It was, great question. I should look at my
Was it like just
record.
some dude?
It might have been just some dude. Okay. I have a feeling that money did not go to the Lloyd Center General Fund, if you will. Yeah. So that's a perfect introduction to sometimes the rabbit holes that I can encounter. Mike, I got 2 of those signs, believe it or not. One of them I gave to my parents because that store held even more meaning for them. It is on the wall of their dining room. My dad somehow mounted it to the wall.
Wow.
I do not know how. And he put blue LEDs in it, which I thought was really cool. So it looks beautiful. The other sign remained a ghost in the office for all time, always in the way of everything everyone's trying to do. And we just moved offices and we just sold it to somebody on Facebook Marketplace, I think for $100. So the circle is complete. Yeah. And the Arby's sign too. I got rid of an Arby's sign. Yeah. Anyways, whatever. Yeah. I got a lot of stories to tell.
Getting back to the topic at hand, I asked this of our last guest, and I think I know the answer for you, but I'll just ask you, did you ever work at McDonald's or any fast food place or anything like that?
I didn't. I did not, Mike. I technically, my first job when I was a teenager was working at a software rental store here in Portland, Oregon.
Very normal.
How do I explain? You know what? That's a different podcast, but you used to be able to rent software just like you would rent VHS cassettes only for the purpose of piracy. You would rent the software, you would copy it, and you would take it back. And then eventually they figured it out and got mad and shut them all down. But there was a weird one, Soft Cell Software, I think it was called. And I just would go there all the time when my parents were taking 700 years to eat dinner and look at all the games. And then eventually the guy's like, hey, you should work here. You know a lot about these things. I didn't last long. I think I was mysteriously quietly fired because I just played games the whole time. Go figure if like a 13-year-old's working in your store. So, and then, college, and then the internet showed up and the web showed up and I got sucked into making websites for people. And I just somehow short circuited the job. But, I would love to. I would genuinely love to. Greg Maletic, who also works at Panic, has a dream of operating the nicest, best McDonald's. This is like his
Don't we all?
A passion of his. So you should talk to him at some point.
Let me just say, it's not too late.
I think so too.
So I guess separate from that, what's your history with McDonald's then? Like where does
That's such a good question.
affiliation come from? Where does the so that sort of like feeling come from for you?
I was thinking about this before I hopped on here, that I've had like different, just like Lloyd Center, I've had different eras of McDonald's affiliation. I definitely, as a kid, anybody growing up in the 80s and 90s, inescapable. It's like just a part of the fabric of my brain at this point. The characters, the ads, the references, the Halloween buckets, like you name it, it's all in there. Remarkable to me that the taste of a sweet and sour sauce has not changed a millimeter since it did when I was a kid. And the nuggets themselves, there are very few things that I can count on as being consistent throughout my life. That is definitely one of them. I feel like when I went to college, I was like, oh, this is garbage. I really shouldn't eat this stuff anymore. There was a long period of time when I actively avoided McDonald's and most fast food, if you can believe it, given the cable of today. But later, kind of just sort of rediscovered the basic simplicity and honestly deliciousness of, depending on what you order, of a McDonald's meal. Now, it's hard. It's not the kind of thing I like to admit really publicly, because I don't think it's really smiled upon usually of like, yes, I enjoy a filet-o-fish occasionally.
We've talked about this before about, there's some shame. There's some shame
there really
around it. And I could say, like now that I'm working at a hamburger restaurant, everyone passes through the drive-thru. There's no absence of a certain kind of person. And at the same time, before that, I didn't really know anyone who regularly went.
Right. And I feel like, so this was a thing that I had to grapple with when I gave my talk at XOXO. Mm-hmm. I spent a long time thinking about, do I need to sort of acknowledge the problematic side of McDonald's? This is a very aware group. These are people that really are, not to generalize, but they're gonna know McDonald's ain't great, like 100%. And I wrestled with that a lot. I thought about saying, just like a couple slides, like, I don't, they can pay their workers better. They can, there's like a lot of things that McDonald's could do better. However, you can't deny the importance and, what's the right word? It's just sort of a centerpiece, for better or worse, of a type of culture that is going to exist presumably for a very long time. I love traveling internationally and trying McDonald's internationally. It's one of life's true pleasures. It's like, what do they got at the German McDonald's? Like that's,
And it creates such a comparison point because the original and you can see the difference. Whereas
totally true.
If you just go fully into a foreign food, like it's a totally different culture. What's it related to? How do you compare those things?
It's just as culturally valid as getting a fancy omakase at like in my opinion, it's like, it's really interesting. Even in Hawaii is a fascinating comparison point where like you can get Loco Moco, I think, or like the peach pie or whatever, it's like, I love that. This is going to be a long podcast. I love that you have this touchstone in your own life that can be culturally compared to other places. Of course, it's all run by this big giant corporation that probably kind of sucks on some level, at least, there's a lot of questions about what can our climate support the food production, it's just, there's infinite levels of challenges, but I'm definitely trying to focus, or I try to also see the challenges and the positivity. And I think what you said, Mike, everybody visits this place. And that's one of my favorite things about it. I love, if I'm waiting for the food, and I mentioned this in my talk, making weird small talk with people. They probably think I'm nuts, but I genuinely love it. It's so nice to connect, even just for a few milliseconds. Even if we're both just like, man, this is taken forever. And we have that like shared moment of like, we're all on this planet together and we just happen to be standing inside the same McDonald's. And that's a beautiful thing sometimes. Yeah.
That aspect of the sort of regional differences, or international differences, I feel like is a good segue into this horrible blandification
Yes.
of
Yeah,
McDonald's that
for
you
sure.
talk about. And I think all part of that kind of Vision 2020
Yeah.
push, which, and just very quickly on the side, we also struggle with all of those issues about McDonald's with this very podcast.
Challenging.
So we
Yeah.
are very much in the same boat with that. But we also get to sort of like push on it in different ways consistently instead of one talk. So it makes it a little easier.
That's awesome.
But that Vision 2020 remodel,
Yes.
my understanding of that from a business perspective is that it was much more about an upgrade of the equipment and back end of the restaurant.
okay.
And that the sort of, let's make everything consistent externally was also a part of it, right? But that wasn't, if you go back and you look at a lot of that literature, and I think Zach has done this as well, that's not the focus of what this thing was about. And yet is definitely the experience that a customer is going to interact with.
Tell me
the
more,
most.
Zach, because from my perspective, it's all got to look the same, which isn't necessarily bad. Like, you look at a Burger King, man, they need a Vision 2020 program. Like, they have some of the jankiest, most decrepit stores out there. Yeah. Anyways.
Well, I think they have looked the same. McDonald's has been consistent throughout its history. In the 90s, I bet you would feel that most McDonald's looked the same. And as we discovered on a recent case study, one thing that happened in the 90s with tobacco lawsuits was that the idea that fast food is next. And one way that fast food is going to have litigation and risk is around children, marketing to children. And so I think that might explain Vision 2020 more than their official documents, just that they want to remove the clown, the stuff we all grew up with, and the four of us all grew up with and enjoyed. But I think that's a big part of it.
Sidebar, we've talked about this a lot. When did clowns flip? Like, people were delighted by clowns. It was like a really long time.
I was reading this in this is my stack of McDonald's books back here. And there was a moment, and I believe it was in the 90s, when the dark clown stuff started happening.
Like, it has to be a huge part of
and
John Wayne Gacy. Like,
there was a moment when they were like, "Oh, let's tone down on Ronald for a little while."
Tone down the clown.
Tone down the clown.
That was an
initiative. But so there was a specific reaction to what was happening in the culture with dark clowning.
Clowning. Yeah, beautiful. It's just weird to see that happen over the course of my life, where everyone's like, clowns are the greatest. Every 70s show, I'm going to be a clown, like whatever. And now, Jesus, do not get anywhere near that. I'm sorry for the sidebar.
We talk about this. One of the thesis of this entire show is essentially how you can talk about anything through the lens of McDonald's.
Yes.
We generally will try and fail to focus on one thing per episode. But the problem is that McDonald's literally touches everything.
Yes.
And you look at these business case studies that we generally look at from Harvard Business Review, and it's every topic about business. It's, it's labor issues, it's automation, it's AI, it's all of these different discounting. The environment, supply chain,
cultural
logistics.
issues.
Right to repair, like it's all in there.
Yeah, it's all in there.
Yeah.
So it's you can't find something that McDonald's isn't, getting into at some level and having to deal with. And so it's an interesting lens on everything.
One place to start might be, you have a website now called westcook.art. What is on that website, and how did that begin?
Before we talk about this, it's important to note that in this room for the last, 4 or 5 years, there's been a piece of art directly in front of me hanging on the wall. And I took that artwork down so that you can see the environment that I work in. And that is, for those of you who can't see,
Oh my God.
what I'm showing here is an enormous West Cook painting of Ronald McDonald. It's somewhat dimensional. It's fantastically well done.
Wow.
It sort of stares at me all day, every day.
It's a cutout.
It is a cutout. It's a wooden cutout, beautifully hand painted, a sort of canonical Ronald look. Illustrated, painted, designed by someone named Wes Cook. So, as the story goes, I was introduced to this artist through a mural, like Mike alluded to. There was, on the way up to Seattle, we stopped in a McDonald's in Centralia, and there's just this absurdly beautiful mural of a very pastoral. Is that the word? Am I using that word correctly? Washington State scene with Ronald and Grimace and everybody. I describe it in my talk as sort of basically better than it had any right to be. It's a mural jammed into the kids section of a McDonald's. In 2024, it's actually almost inconceivable that anything like this would exist. What we would have is a digital printout of some stock art. Oh God, it'd probably be AI art actually in 2024.
Digital signage, probably. Yeah.
Nothing that would feel like artistry, right? Nothing that would feel like handcrafted or handmade. But this mural felt handcrafted and handmade. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it and staring at it, and got in the car, and I just become this insane Google machine. Like, who is this artist? Also remarkably signed, which is another thing in 2024 that you would never, ever see.
Right.
So an artist's name in the corner of a piece of commercial artwork in a fast food restaurant? Inconceivable. And so I started to look into this person. Who is Wes Cook? And there wasn't much. Actually, there was basically nothing on the internet about this person, which to me was even more tantalizing, because what is not available on the internet one Google search away, right? It just spiraled into sort of a mini obsession, because it became clear that this person who painted this mural was this incredibly talented commercial artist that had worked on many things that I loved in the world, from theme parks to TV shows to commercials to lots and lots of McDonald's stuff. I sort of embarked on a journey, perhaps my most complex journey yet. Really a long journey, to be honest, because there are many pieces of this puzzle. There were a lot of people to talk to. Who was this person? Why is this art all on eBay? That's the thing. Tons of his art was on eBay, and I started to snap it up and make deals with these people because nobody seemed to want any of it. Anyways.
Well, and to be clear, we're not talking prints. The original drawing.
Pencil sketches. Correct. Anyways, I don't necessarily need to rehash the whole talk, because I probably did it better on stage. But in general, it became clear that in the framework of McDonald's, Wes Cook was a very important person. Those characters that I talked about that are just enmeshed in the fabric of my consciousness, that might be overstating it a little, but those were potentially all designed by him. And this is maybe a lost and critical figure. So one thing that I was not really able to work into my talk was, and I think you would all find this super interesting, when McDonald's initially wanted to put together commercials and try to get kids into the restaurant, they went to the preeminent creator of nightmarish children's entertainment in the 70s, which is Sid and Marty Krofft, who created a show called HR Puffin Stuff and a series of absolute psychedelic horrors with puppets and that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but their work is fascinating. I would love to know more about that. But they went to that company and started working on commercials. And then this case, you can look up online. There was a very big lawsuit between McDonald's and Sid and Marty Krofft. And the complaint basically was McDonald's stole all our most important people and all of our designs and is making their own commercials that are total Sid and Marty Krofft ripoffs. And we don't like that at all. And we're really mad about that. And one of the articles that I read about that described specifically how McDonald's poached, quote, key personnel from Sid and Marty Krofft. I quickly learned that Wes Cook was a Sid and Marty Krofft designer. He worked on HR Puffin Stuff. He designed all of these set pieces. I have some more stuff in the basement I still have to scan, but he worked on a lot of that. And I don't have proof because his name never showed up in the lawsuit directly that I can find with my brief Google moments. But I'm convinced that he was one of those key personnel, that he was a critical figure. McDonald's was like, we want to do this. We don't want to pay these Hollywood big shots. We can do this on our own. Went to this company called Set Makers, took Wes and started to make these commercials, which are now a critical piece of culture.
So is your understanding then that McDonald's encouraged some of these critical people to branch off and start their own company? Or did they work directly for McDonald's?
It's a great question. it's unclear to me. So Wes ended up working for Set Makers, and it's unclear to me whether Set Makers was at the center of the, like, was Set Makers created as a response to, here's a huge contract to do a bunch of commercials, but we don't want to give it to Sid and Marty Krofft? Or did Set Makers already exist? Or did Wes already exist at Set Makers and did work for Set? The timeline is unclear to me.
Okay.
I would love y'all's help to untangle this, so please get on it. But the long and short of it is that I think, yeah, he pivoted straight from Sid and Marty Krofft work to McDonald's work. And you can see that in the through line of all of the pieces that he designed. And I think that, yeah, we don't know much about this guy at all, but I think he was basically responsible for the McDonald land that we know.
The material that you've collected then, when you look at it as a timeline, I assume everything's dated. Can you see that hard transition? Is there other like TV work or...
There's big gaps
Okay.
in the stuff that I have. So an important thing to note is when I found Wes Cook's artwork on eBay, I was late to the game. Like, I think his stuff had been there for a really long time. And the real weird guy that I bought a lot of it from indicated that the McDonald's stuff went instantly.
Oh.
Of all the stuff that went up for sale, McDonald's collectors jumped on that stuff first. The McDonald's pieces that I have of Wes Cook are like scraps that were like mixed in with some Disney work or misfiled or whatever. I asked the seller one time, like, of the stuff that I bought, which was like 150 plus pieces, like, what percentage do you think it was of all the stuff that you sold? And he was like, I don't know, 10 to 20%. So
just
yeah,
Wes Cook stuff, material.
Yes. So there was a lot out there. There's a lot out there. And I mean, that segues a little bit to how I learned about Vision 2020. I'm talking so much, but thank you for having me.
Have you engaged with these McDonald's collectors who may have bought?
Yes. Great question. So how I learned about Vision 2020 was through a guy named Brian. I don't want to mispronounce his last name. Brian is a huge pop art / McDonald's collector. And my favorite thing about Brian is that he is also the founder of a company called Really Big Stuff, which had a catalog that was known for selling giant versions of things. So for example, if you like pencils, but you want an enormous pencil, you go to reallybigstuff.com. That was him. That was his business idea and his company. And it might have been from my Twitter thread that I heard from him. In fact, we just talked a couple of weeks ago because he has sketches of all of the McDonaldland playground architectural renderings that Wes Cook did, except he missed an auction where I grabbed 2 of them. And so I'm probably going to sell them to him. I scanned them. I'm good. But he's like, it's been in his mind for years. He's like, you have those 2 that I need. You got to give me those other 2.
You can trade him for digital scans of something else.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. He's super nice, but he was the one that saw my story of a mural and was like, hey, keep an eye on this. There's this thing coming down the line, this Vision 2020 thing.
Oh, wow.
That mural might not be there forever. If it weren't for him mentioning this as a possibility to me, well, we'll get to that later.
You would, yeah. Wow. Okay. Wow.
I'm giving you some rabbit holes to go through now. Yeah. Great big stuff, I think, actually. Not really big stuff. Sorry. It might be great big stuff.
Chris, can we talk about supply chain logistics?
All day, I am here for this.
Thank you. This time, it's about our sponsor, Fireproof.storage.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
I started thinking about how using something like Fireproof's local first database technology could empower a new era of supply chain transparency. And not just for like the biggest chains in the world, but now even for the smallest of burger operators, maybe even especially those small operators.
Oh, that's interesting, but I'm sensing that this might get extremely technical real fast.
Yeah, it definitely gets too technical, but basically it could be a new, better, easier way of implementing unit level serialization, which I know this starts to get boring, but this is how the giant national chains are able to operate at scale so well. And by starting with the right database choice, something like Fireproof, it means these benefits are available to anyone.
Like literally anyone?
Well, anyone who's a database engineer, but I mean, I guess it's 2025. Who's not a database engineer these days?
Fair enough. All right, Mike, this is potentially fascinating, but maybe there is somewhere the database engineers can go to get your full thoughts on this.
Definitely. I wrote sort of an entire manifesto about it. Just go to hamburgerbusinessreview.com/fireproof and I'll walk you through the whole thing, basically taking you from farms to French fries.
All right, and there you have it. Thanks to our sponsor, fireproof.storage, for inspiring Mike to write a hamburger database manifesto, which you can read at hamburgerbusinessreview.com/fireproof. And now, back to our program.
This world of the McDonald's collectors, how into it are you? How much have you interacted with this community? Are they all hanging out on a Reddit or something somewhere? Like,
I wish.
Like what? Yeah,
They must have their own Discord.
If they do, I hope they invite me, because really my only interaction has been through this one person. And
Okay.
so I hope that, I feel like I would really enjoy just listening into those conversations. I keep a pretty close eye on eBay. There are definitely items that show up and disappear pretty quickly. One thing that I've always had my eye on is this absolutely incredible desk lamp that Set Makers made, which is the hamburger desk lamp. And it's got the eyes, and the eyes glow because the lamp's in there. It's one of the most beautiful things you will ever see. But they show up and they're like $1,000 to $2,000, and they'll sell instantly. And so there is a big market. In fact, it got to the point where I'm like, the last one I saw was in such impeccable condition that I almost thought, has someone figured out you can make these?
Right.
And make a
Replicas,
lot
yeah.
of money.
Right.
Because that will eventually happen, right? If the market's big enough. Anyway, so there is definitely a group of people out there that love this stuff. And the biggest piece of heartbreak for me, not knowing who those collectors are and coming to the auctions late, was that I missed out on this one incredibly important piece of Wes Cook McDonald's art, which I can describe a little bit here if you want me to, or you...
Please do.
Okay. I saw it I did a completed auction search, and I had missed it by 3 weeks. And it was described as a parody triptych. And just the grainiest, crappiest JPEGs were all that remained of this eBay auction. But I immediately downloaded them and saved them to disk.
It's amazing that your holy grail of McDonald's art is also religious art.
Is a religious, correct. So this piece, it's called The Satire. It was in a folder which was labeled Ronald McDonald Triptych Satire. And from what I can tell from the bad JPEGs, Wes was working on a beautiful, fully hand-painted mural covering the what is it? It's the baptism, the crucifixion, and the ascension of Christ, told through the McDonaldland characters. Extremely blasphemous, right? You've got Ronald literally on the cross. Well, Mike, you've got...
Is Ronald Jesus?
Maybe not. I don't know much about religious imagery.
Two worlds that, again, McDonald's touches everything.
Okay, there we go. I think Mayor McCheese and Grimace are crying at the feet of Ronald. There's I think that's Mayor McCheese wearing a yarmulke on the right.
I was curious about that. Was that supposed to be? That's that supposed to be God or like Moses?
Great question.
Like what's going? Because he's up there.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
You're right, maybe.
And he looks McCheesy, but he's got the yarmulke, and I'm like, so that would imply, is it only because McCheese
That's
is a
some
big
Old
head,
Testament stuff, yeah.
right? And so,
Maybe
but I
you're
mean,
right.
But I think the yarmulke is about your relationship to God. I don't think God would be wearing a yarmulke.
right? But then again, I don't know what Wes's intent behind the whole thing even was, right?
Correct. Well, I have a little more information on that. But my favorite is the note in the corner, Captain Crook, who's completely forgotten now, right? Captain Crook was the Filet-O-Fish sort of captain. Captain Crook kneeling, offering sword. It's like one of my favorite notes of all time. Like, it
That's not
looks
in the
like
Bible.
it would have been. This is June 20th, 1978. It's dated. And it looks, it's just incredible because he's bringing with it his unbelievable art skill.
Timeline wise, is this after most of his work or in the midst of it?
This is peak. This is like just when he's absolutely
so he's
taken
violating the tenets of the dominant religion at the time and his primary employer in a piece of art that he's working on.
I have a lot of thoughts. Yes.
Because one of the big questions to me was it looked just like the other art that was then realized as an actual mural. So this implies that there could be a mural.
So I spoke with someone that worked with him and knew him quite well. And this was one of the first things he brought up with me. I think it was infamous among him and his friends. And as he told me, Wes's dream was to finish the painted piece and use it as his Christmas card, which I thought was incredible. Now, there's an entire sidebar of conversation to be had of this, because I can't think of anything less likely to work in the year 2024 than this satire. Meaning, if you were the official McDonald's artist today and you did 6 pencil strokes of this idea, your friend would take a picture and post it to Twitter and you'd be fired within 3 hours.
Yes.
I mean, not even McDonald's. Even go back to like when I worked for you. If I had done this with you crucified on a cross and, Stephen Frank holding up a sponge of vinegar or whatever, that would have been weird.
A little weird. I mean, I don't think I would have been too mad, but I don't know what that says about our work environment. But I think you're right. But I think the difference is that we're in a time where you can't secretly do something like this for fun. He could do this and show it to a couple of his coworkers and they'd laugh about it. And maybe someday somebody would be like to the exec, oh, you should see the funny thing Wes is working on. But that's as far as it would go. McDonald's would never, this isn't going to get printed in the newspaper. This isn't going to show up in Life magazine. Like there's no way for anyone to see these images unless, now the Christmas card probably would have wrecked it a little. Someone's going to keep that Christmas card. But it's just fascinating to me that many layers, that his sense of humor was such that he would even have this idea in the first place. And it did help me kind of understand Wes as a person, because I think he grew up in a extremely religious family. I do not think he was extremely religious. And I think that this sort of subversive joke was really funny to him and really sort of kept the job interesting to him, where I'm sure he's getting burned out at some point, right? And this kind of keeps it going. But then, again, the fact that you could just do it and not worry about it is mind-boggling to me, because that is not the world we live in today.
Well, and it reminds me of, wasn't that the origin of South Park? That they made a Christmas tape of the original animation, and then that got around, and some
people were making copies. Yeah.
And it was about Christmas, right?
It totally was.
Kind of in the neighborhood, but I mean,
also sacrilegious,
right? But also the handmadeness of this is another kind of element that I think is so. And you're mentioning this earlier. I just want to point out that the physicality of the mural, right? Imagine that you were to put a piece of fine art, like a fine art, at human height, like reachable by probably children, in a restaurant. In like the early 80s or something? Like, do you know when it was installed?
Yeah, in 82, 83, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's there for 40 years.
Yeah.
And it's still in good shape. Like, what?
It's mind-boggling to me. There were some ketchup stains. There was a little mustard.
It's so hard to do this via audio when we're talking about something that is visual. So again, I think, it's even hardly spoilers, but just everyone needs to go and look at this thing.
Yes.
It also is something, as much as we're describing this as a beautiful piece of art, I do think that in a pre-remodeled McDonald's, if you went in and this was in a playland, it wouldn't seem out of place.
I agree with you.
Right? There's something about the color palette and the design and the things. It is from an era. It looks like it belongs.
That's an interesting point. It feels out of place in 2024.
Right.
But it wouldn't have felt out of place back then. Yeah. Or for a while. That's totally true.
Well, and this is part of the thing. I mean, I feel like my reaction to the, Vision 2020 thing? Is that essentially I feel like we've desaturated everything. And a thing that in my memory, McDonald's was orange and yellow and kind of red in a warm way. That's kind of sticky and greasy at the same time, but that was it. That's what it was. And like the characters themselves had these bright, weird colors, like they're oranges and yellows and reds and purples, I guess. And then now it's just like gray washed, vinyl or something. It's very desaturated and kind of nothing.
Yeah, and I would say too, like one thing I remember from high school is having, I think it was one of the Fry Guy like statues, and covered in this thick plastic coating to make it easy to clean, like to make it kind of shiny. And you go into a modern McDonald's now, and everything's kind of matte and feels very subdued, like you were talking about, Chris. And that difference, in addition to the reduced color palette, it is a really stark feeling. It go from this like high gloss environment to a really like matte finish.
I mean, even IKEA is more colorful by far, I would think, than a modern McDonald's, which is a really weird thing to do from my point of view. Again, we're from a certain era where, I think we think of kind of the 80s and 90s as it. Now, I'm sure if you were, I don't know, 50s, 60s era, that would be another thing or whatever. But I feel like there's more continuity there than if you grew up now and McDonald's was this gray thing that, you order on the app.
Within this podcast, we look at a lot of these issues through the lens of like a business case study, which often are the beginning and middle of a story, but not the end, because that's where the sort of class business school discussion comes in. And it says like, okay, what would you do from here? Like, what's the appropriate next step? And there's no kind of correct answer. It's sort of a thinking exercise. What was going on at the time that McDonald's felt like they had to do this shift? And you were just saying like Burger King hasn't done it, but you're also disparaging the look of Burger King.
100%.
And so that's interesting because it's like, well, then maybe they need to catch up and become more boring. That doesn't seem like it's the right answer.
I think about this a lot because it's weird that I'm of two minds of the whole remodel thing. I'm like glad they did it. I feel like the stores are cleaner and nicer. It feels more pleasant to get there or get my family in there in particular. At the same time, it's extremely boring. It's like a designer's idea of safe uniqueness. Like, oh, this wall we'll have a tag cloud of like juicy, meaty, whatever, It's like, that is baseline Ross dress for less design, interest. And so I can't figure it out. I wish it was funkier. I wish it was weirder and more unique and had something to talk about, anything to talk about. Like that thing is cool or interesting. At the same time, it's more comfortable and pleasant. So how do I square those two things? I don't know.
Your view on so much of this stuff obviously impacted me for many years as your employee. As we went to Subway for a very long time. We got very into going to Chipotle for a long time. And you have a sincere appreciation of a chain restaurant. But at the same time, like you also took me to Galco's on a visit to Los Angeles for the first time, right? Which is one of the most classic and at the time very out of the way like soda shops selling these. Like you have an appreciation of both sides of these things, and yet culturally it feels like they're in opposition to one another.
I totally agree.
And so it feels like you should choose a side.
Pick a side is what you're telling me.
And I'm not asking you to, but like, how do you
sidesing the McDonald's?
How do you? I see you wrestling with it even now, and so I'm just curious. Like when you see something get remodeled, is that different than something new popping up?
There's one brand new Burger King that they just built out in Tigard by Intel next to the Topgolf and the K1 Speed. And it was a very weird experience to be in a brand new Burger King where everything was new. And they had some nice design ideas and it still felt very safe and sort of antiseptic. And I still would take it any day over a junky rundown like this. There's a weird thing that happens when the design of a space also impacts like your mental concept of food safety and quality. And those things are hard to break apart where it's like, I don't know that I even trust eating at this Burger King because it looks like it hasn't been. So there's so many complex factors that all arrive at once. You're right, though. If I had to make a choice, the planet will explode if you do not pick this era of McDonald's or whatever, I would almost certainly do old. Any day of the week, I would take.
But let's say the stakes are simply your preference, but you have to decide, and there's no impact. It's just an aesthetic preference.
So, like in Portland, there's 2 McDonald's. This one's old. This one's new. Okay, my answer to that is very funny, which is like, if it's just me, I'm going to the old one. If I'm with the family, I'd probably want to take them to the new one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and this, what's interesting is the ketchup patina that acquires at a hamburger restaurant over time. These operations and the way that they're designed, essentially half-staffed by teenagers.
Yeah.
They are being cleaned, but not in the way like, it's a wipe down. It's a wipe down. It's a wipe down. And every once in a while, there's a little bit of a deep clean or a team comes in to do it.
Yeah.
But it's not like there is buildup, I think. So there creates maybe kind of a cleanliness half-life that sort of imposes updates.
As much as you clean it, you'll never get it new.
Never. Nicole, if she doesn't mind me saying this, very sensitive to that type of environment. Really does not like the feeling of like, I can tell that this place has not been like significantly cleaned in a really long time. Does not want to eat in a Taco Bell, for example. Meanwhile, I'm like, whatever. Oh, I dropped my burrito on the floor.
The main station that I'm at my hamburger restaurant is COD1, which is the first drive-through window.
Cool.
It is a like kind of generic rack holding 2 computers that are that I use, but it can't move.
Oh.
You can't move the rack out of its little nook because it has to be in 24-hour operation. So things fall. The computer's it's a stainless steel kind of counter. I cleaned it the other day because it was slow. The amount of grime just on the back, it's not even where the food is, It just hadn't been cleaned because it's not part of the, they're mopping 2 or 3 times a day, the floor, all this stuff. But and in the nooks and crannies, you can't get in there because you'd have to unplug these critical machines. And the amount of time it takes to reload a computer at a modern hamburger restaurant is not friendly to the operation. So it's like that level of I noticed that and I don't like it and I can't do anything about it even as an employee.
Here's the anti-pro tip. Don't ever look behind the McCafe machine at the gap between the McCafe machine and the retaining wall, the holes. You will see horrors the likes of which you have never witnessed. Yeah.
Cable, it seems like you're describing the old restaurants as having artistry and the new restaurants as being clean. There's nothing saying we couldn't have a clean restaurant with artistry, and I think that's what's missing.
That's a really good point. That's a super good point and really interesting. That doesn't even feel like a possibility to me.
Right. Because the new design is like a concept. It's we're gonna think of what we want you to feel, and we're gonna write that as text, and you're gonna read the text.
I was texting Cable when we were kind of working on when we were going to do this recording, and I came across a design, like an architecture blog that had written up the design of the headquarters of McDonald's.
Totally.
Which looked surprisingly good.
Yes.
And, having worked at Panic during some remodels where we worked with some amazing designers. It wasn't Andy Hess level, but it was like these places look like they would be enjoyable places to work and are beautiful work environments. Why does that not get translated to the restaurant design?
Great question. Or the HQ, the big flagship in Chicago. It's super interesting. Like cool design, multi-level. The one in Orlando, they still did something fun there. It's possible. So getting back to the West Cook mural, one thing we can't forget is that each of these murals was custom designed for the store they were in. So if your store was in Hawaii, he's going to do this amazing surfing mural or whatever, covered wagon or, you name it. That also feels impossible today. I would never imagine a piece of bespoke custom, again, Taco Bell or Burger King or whatever art speaking to the region without, if they did try that, it would be like when you stay at a chain hotel and it's like, keep Portland weird on the wall or whatever.
The bureaucracy that is built up, that's sort of calcified in these organizations wouldn't allow for sort of the right choice to be made at the individual level.
Right. I mean, so this was one guy that you could assign to this project. I want to buy a custom mural. I'm a franchisee. I want to buy a custom mural for my store. You are set makers. You make custom murals for stores. I am ordering one from you. I want it to look like this, all that other stuff. Is that impossible today? It doesn't seem like it should be.
It's hard to imagine a franchisee not seeing the franchise as just a vehicle to make money. For me, that's what it is.
I think it's also top-down mandated. I would be surprised if they were allowed to make changes outside a certain level of scope. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But why?
Because standardization is key to the whole operation. It has to feel the same.
If you open that door just a little bit, then the next thing you know, you have this like rogue McDonald's that
doesn't work the same or doesn't
Right.
feel the same to the customer. It's designed to be interchangeable as an experience.
Well, and this even gets back to Cable mentioning that the consistency, the sort of impermeability of a McNugget over a period of decades.
Right.
I wonder if that's part of this. Like, if this is the bad side effect of everything has to be the same everywhere forever. It's like, well, yeah, we like that in some contexts. And in other contexts, we say, but why can't it be cool, you know?
Okay. I'm going to throw out an alternate. So I always want to call this place Famous Dave's, but no, Dave's Hot Chicken, not Famous Dave's. Dave's Hot Chicken. You've surely been to a Dave's Hot Chicken? Mike, have you been to a Dave's Hot Chicken?
I don't think so.
Okay.
You're going to have to explain it for us.
Did I get the name right? Let me just really quick. Yeah, Dave's Hot Chicken. Okay. So it's a chain. I think it started in California. It's, chicken fingers, right? Classic 2024 chain. There is a company that they hire to go up to each restaurant and do custom art. They do it's all kind of corny graffiti style custom art. However, it is actual artists being flown to the location. The one here in Portland, the closest one to me is on Sandy. And ironically, it was a former Wendy's. So it's got the bones of a Wendy's, which is a creepy sentence. Never dig up those bones. It didn't occur to me until this exact moment that it is technically possible. Now, how many Dave's Hot Chickens are there in the world? It ain't gonna be as many as there are remodeled McDonald's in the world, but there is a facility where you can say, we want this, and they might put Rip City, which, I'll take it, over just a generic, digital print. It's at least spray paint and masked art, and they're putting effort into it. You should look up some pictures of Dave's Hot Chicken.
Trader Joe's does this in Harlem. They have a goofy Trader Joe's Harlem graffiti.
They have local artists that do the chalk drawings and all. Tom used to do that. My friend Tom used to do that at Trader Joe's. So how many locations do they have?
Right.
And they have this either person or firm that they can trust,
Correct.
which presumably was West Cook and or set makers for McDonald's at a time when they had fewer locations. So maybe it's just something where the scale now is so large that it no longer makes sense.
I'm trying to think of what would the equivalent be of set makers. Is there an architecture firm that takes on all of McDonald's?
I think there is. In fact, I took some pictures of the blueprints of the remodeling of the Centralia McDonald's. I will go dig that up in a minute and see if I can get you, because I looked them up. And there's also, I know this only from my Disney fandom, that the Disney theme parks, that there's this company called Gensler, this enormous architecture firm that I think is looked down upon now because it's Disney basically, it's a long story and another podcast, but they basically lost all of their talent because they said they were going to move to Florida and everybody quit, and then they changed their mind. It's a whole thing. And so they end up outsourcing a bunch of stuff today, and they outsource most of the hotel design now and maybe even some stuff in the parks now to Gensler. And it's impossible not to feel that they are the robotic, safe architecture design company where we will design things that will not offend anyone or whatever. But I'm going to look up those blueprints and I will send you that later. And maybe you could put them in the show notes. Did I get that right? Are there show notes? I don't know.
There's an email. There's everything.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
At my hamburger restaurant, there used to be mascots, and it used to be one of these interesting, really, really fascinating and interesting and unique locations. And they had these dioramas encased in glass.
Yep.
And you can still see the images of it on Yelp. And then you go there and it's obviously been fully remodeled.
Yeah.
But they still have one of the original character statues in the back office.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool.
Yeah. And it's they got rid of, but they talked about people came in when they were doing the remodel and took the tables because they had been coming. They had met, fell in love,
huge,
had children, like McDonald's as a community space. It's something we talked about when Brian was on. It's people that go to McDonald's often, they go very often. When it becomes your neighborhood space, it's just, that's it, like you go there over and over and over again, and it becomes an important thing. And those changes are incredibly culturally disruptive.
And the Centralia one, every time I went to that McDonald's, it was all tables of elderly people with their coffees having conversation. Like, it was clear that this was the community center for that very small town, or for some people in that small town. And that, you can't discount the importance of that. I just thought of something too, when we think about the custom changes and the tweaks and stuff. Violet, my daughter, she's 10. It's so funny when we go into a space, if it's like a little retro or whatever, and I'm like, oh man, check it out, they still have the whatever, and I'm like super excited about it, she'll always be like, Dad, it feels weird. This place feels weird. Like, she gets a vibe from, she doesn't know that it's 70s or 80s or 90s, but she knows it's not now. And it makes her kind of uncomfortable. And like, when I think what you're saying, Mike, about the dioramas or the whatever, every one of those elements kind of ratchets up that weird meter a little bit for a lot of people, I think, which is unfortunate.
What was the equivalent of that to you, do you think?
I have them. I remember specifically 2 places in Portland. Nobody's going to know what these are, but the Galleria downtown was a mall, made me feel really weird. Like, there was a zone in the 70s where they sort of figured out that they could redevelop old warehouses and stuff and turn them into malls. And so it didn't feel like a mall, but it didn't feel like a warehouse. And it made me profoundly uncomfortable. And the second one in town is the same. It was called John's Landing. It was an old warehouse turned into a mall. And the floorboards are creaking, and it's a maze, and all the shops smell weird. Everything made me feel extremely weird. So I can totally relate to that vibe. You don't want that vibe from your restaurant that is trying to be successful if you're a franchisee, I guess.
I feel like that vibe is probably present if you go into any Sizzler or Long John Silver's.
Oh, yeah. Or Chang's Mongolian Grill. You should come back to a Chang's Mongolian Grill sometime, Mike.
I'm going to try and pivot it a little bit. We're going to talk about your work at Panic in an interesting way here.
Sure.
Let me start by saying one thing about your blog that I've always enjoyed is the 4th of July posts about the firework packaging and all of the artistry behind it.
Yes.
And a conclusion that I draw from this is that you are a little bit obsessed with this kind of ubiquitous commercial artistry.
Yeah.
Both as an observer and also as a practitioner at Panic.
Yes.
Which came first?
I don't know. I was just thinking about this earlier today. I have a lot of like Pokemons in my life, and let me elaborate on that a little bit. Things in the real world that I'm noticing and start collecting mentally. I got a sort of unstoppable thing with cereal boxes, and every new cereal that gets introduced, I have to buy a box of it, and I put the box in my basement. I try to eat the cereal, but I'm going to be honest, I end up throwing out a lot of cereal. Composting. And it feels almost like what am I even doing? Why am I still doing this after 10 or 15 years? And I can't totally explain it, although it's many things. One is there's somebody working on this stuff all the time, multiple times a year. There's a mandate. We have to introduce 10 new cereals, and let's hope that, I don't know, this is the second thing that I'm obsessed with. What is the ratio of successes? And it is microscopic of the new products that are introduced in a given year. It is like 1% maybe actually become like long-term products that we buy every year forever. It is such a incredible throw it at the wall and see what sticks. But after, I'm sure, tons of test marketing and research, and like, none of it's willy-nilly, but what stays is so slim. So I think about the people that are working on these things all the time, and boy, I hope my new cereal sticks around. They probably don't. Same thing probably with the fireworks, where that actually had an element of comedy on top of it. So not only is it this art being produced using exclusively clip art and stock art and
designed to be destroyed.
Right, designed to be destroyed and
to be sold illegally often too.
Yeah. And designed by someone presumably not from American culture's perception of what American culture is, which I think is always funny and super interesting and honestly right 99% of the time.
Probably truer than our own interpretation.
More accurate. Oh, just slap a AK on there and you're good to go. Like, are they aware of the comedy when they pair a really funny image with a really funny name and like both of those things share a thread too of like, as a designer, I'm trying to sell my thing. I have to stand out on a shelf next to 80 million things that look exactly like my thing and hope that my thing will succeed. And if it sells great, my boss might notice and I might get a, pat on the back or whatever. Like, that's an interesting cycle. Ugh.
But I want to push back on your choice to be so design focused in your life and your work, because I don't believe that it's monetary based at all for you.
Okay,
if anything,
that's a good
it's
point.
possibly a
Yeah.
sickness. Is it still pixel perfect software? Is that still a term that
yeah.
gets used for
Sure.
products? The obsession and the design elements of the things that you're making, whether it's a physical product, sometimes a box that has no software in it sometimes,
Sure.
or, the pixels on the screen, there's a level of detail and obsession that you're putting into that is beyond what is required at any level.
Right. Totally fair. And I'm scared to analyze myself too deeply because it might all crumble. But if I step back a little bit, all of that input, all of the cereal boxes, all of the whatever, all of the stuff that I'm noticing all the time, like it all sort of munges into this machine. And what spits out the other end is like, that's good and that's not as good.
Taste.
What I have found as I get older and as I do more of this is that system becomes really efficient, and that you can like look at something really quickly and be like, that's a good design, that sticks out, that works. That's bad. They should have done more on that. Very fast in a way that sometimes surprises me. And I think Nevin, who I work with at Panic as a designer, same gut.
Same sickness.
Sickness, where it's just like, and for each other, we might notice little bits and pieces that we might tweak for our own personal preferences. But I feel like the net result of all of that input is just a very efficient decision-making process on good and bad. Now, the problem is good and bad can mean many different things depending on your goals. I see your pushback, Mike, but something that is like clean and impeccably designed might sell horribly because it might look too fancy or not speak to the values of the product or the thing you're trying to make. So it ends up having to be this balance of the two where it's got to sell if you want to stay in business, but you also always want to try to make it as good as you possibly can, because it feels like we're kind of, and this really ties into the whole story, fighting this wave of mediocrity at all times, where it's like, if we can do anything to turn the dial. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is my takeaway from the Wes Cook story is like, I still hope to someday in my life find something to care so much about something as he cared about that is a thing that was like commercial art for McDonald's.
Right. I totally understand. Yep. Same.
Getting back to the system that you have where you can quickly decide good or bad and your love of the artistry, how does this leave you feeling about McDonald's as an entity? Because on the one hand, they're creating the context for, all of these people to have a somewhat uniform experience or to hire Wes Cook. At the same time, they are ruthless about erasing that when it no longer serves their interest and erasing the people behind it.
Right. It's been fascinating watching the last, let's say, 5 years of marketing from McDonald's and all of the special promotions and limited time collaborations with various artists and collectible fancy adult Happy Meal stuff that they've been trying and stuff like that. It seems like there's some group within McDonald's that does see some value in working with artists and creating, in an extremely commercial way, fair, and definitely designed for maximum exposure and sales. But that feels like a fairly new thing for McDonald's to me. There was definitely sort of a dark ages, if you will, where the 90s were winding down, their stores were looking bad, and there was no sense of life. It was just an occasional new product, but not even like a exciting or interesting new product, just kind of like iteration. And that was not my favorite McDonald's zone. It just felt like sleepwalking, kind of. There were some interesting hype zones there. Who can forget the infamous Rick and Morty Szechuan sauce debacle, and they're doing everything that they can. That's interesting because it seems like that has kind of stopped. Y'all know better than I do, but it feels like it's been a while since there's been like a whatever collaboration with a...
No, it's happening all over the place right now in these small little places. Yeah, so there's so much like anime stuff still going on, and they're doing stuff with like designers. They're still doing that, like the
Crocs.
The Crocs.
It seems like they are sort of outsourcing their identity a little bit into these collaborations.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe that it is the work of Wyden and Kennedy team in New York that has the account.
Okay.
I think you can trace it back to them trying to create a sense of cultural like momentum within McDonald's, which I talked about this a lot last season too. Like, I believe McDonald's is a IP company, and they monetize their IP by selling burgers.
Yeah, and it seems like they hired Chris Kempczinski, the current CEO, from Kraft to sort of like bring the brand energy and the storytelling into McDonald's. But I don't think it's definitely not the same type of thing as the homegrown West Cook type stuff at all.
No.
Yeah, I mean, you could compare that to Disney and their progress as well, right? Like, they're probably following the same trend lines.
That's exactly correct. The way I feel about that company is very similar in that, like, now they're just reliant on all their old IP. They're not generating anything new or unique. They're sort of just like churning through the same stuff. Like, it's the same kind of feeling. It's always kind of a heartbreaking feeling because all the magic is still there in some way and could be harnessed and utilized if someone had the guts to say, let's try this or let's do this. It might not work, but let's give it a shot. Like, let's lean in a little bit more to this stuff. If McDonald's were to have a retro something or other division or something, it's not going to affect the regular, like, those two things can coexist. And I feel like it all kind of connects Disney, McDonald's, Apple, all this other stuff to like this feeling I can't shake of a lot of people just being terrified of getting fired for whatever reason. And I just can't shake it. I feel that way with the way choices and decisions are being made, that it seems like, and I can't blame anyone for wanting to hold on to their awesome jobs. If they pay well and they're doing well, like, more power to you. But I feel like you need some type of person that can break that loop a little bit and has the protective barrier to say, this might flop, but it was worth trying. And I feel like you can point to Disney, Apple, and McDonald's as all companies that don't have that person. And I hope that can change, but I don't know if it ever can once the ship has sailed.
We've talked a lot about loss in your XOXO talk and about what's happened to the McDonald's that we love. Have you run into this in Panic? Have you had to demolish a particularly beautiful piece of software and no one will ever see it again?
That's such a good question. As you can imagine, given how I feel about many of these things, I tend to hoard a lot of history. I have many bins filled with prototypes and early ideas and things like that. As I've gotten older, I've gotten more obsessive about save the video, save the whatever, doesn't matter, don't toss it out. But I mean, even I still have some of my work from college sitting on a file server. So,
but as a company, have you ever had to say, we're making something, we've made something beautiful, and now our consumers are no longer going to be able to enjoy it?
There's definitely been apps that we have fully stopped working on that were very painful to do so. It's going to sound so boring to say. Status Board was an app that we made that was incredibly good. It was beautifully designed, incredibly nice, incredible setup, first launch assistant. Like, every aspect of that app was really, really, really gorgeous. And then I guess the reality we found was just, especially with something like building a status board, like, it's never going to meet everybody's needs. And we couldn't figure out who to pursue, whose needs do we want to meet. And it became a big challenge where it's good for us, but like, there's a famous cliche in customer support emails, like, I would love this app if it just did X, right? You can never avoid that. And it's funny every time, but there's some truth to it, which I understand. With an app like Status Board, it was majority, I would love it if it just did X. And at some point you're like, well, crap, we're just not big enough to meet everybody's needs. We can't it's one of the challenges of being a small business that, again, has no investors. And Mike's shaking his head no, but
Because it happens at the hamburger restaurant.
okay.
There are people that drive up, and because we no longer serve breakfast all day, they're gone.
Wow.
They're out. If we're out of something that they wanted to have, or we're not willing to adapt some combination of menu items in the way that they want, they're gone. They leave. So it's like what you're saying, I'm just like, it happens there too, which is wild.
Crazy. I never thought about that. Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, to your question, Zach, that for sure. And it's always hard. Like, we only have so many resources. And if we're putting our resources into something that's not bringing in enough revenue to meet those resources, we just kind of have to say farewell. And it sucks. I don't enjoy it at all. But it has allowed us to keep going. So that part is worth it. Like, if we hadn't ever canceled the things and we were still working on, like, the one thing I can say is that we've so far had a pretty good run of trying different stuff. And that part feels really nice. And I hope that we can keep that going for as long as possible. To the framework of this conversation, I know that nothing lasts forever, but the goal is to just do as much as we can for as long as we can.
Okay, so producer Chris, just jumping in here, we are going to officially say, if you have not watched Cable's XOXO 2024 talk, you probably ought to just pause here and go do that. Because we're going to talk about, there's multiple twists, but we're going to spoil the big twist. So let's go.
The big twist, of course. And again, please, this is your last chance. Please watch the talk.
You're really missing out if you're not.
Yeah, it was. I really tried to structure that thing in a way that it would truly surprise people.
It was in the room, there was a lot of yelling.
I wish I could have been outside myself, because I don't love giving talks at all. In fact, I kind of actively hate it. And I have to go into this, like, I'm usually like a fairly energetic person, but it's like tenfold for me to be able to power through the experience of standing on that stage in this weird room with all these people. But like, I can kind of remember when people caught on to what I was trying to happen at the end. And I remember hearing like literal gasps in the audience, and one person just like stood up like this. And it was again like the 80s movie finale. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And it was interesting because I got lunch with Andy and I was like, hey, I don't know what my talk should be about, but I was thinking I could maybe finally tell the full version of this McDonald's story, which I had a tweet thread on, but I mean, that might as well be buried in the earth at this point. And maybe, probably most people have never heard the story. And I specifically said, what I want to try to do is at the end of the talk, and here's the point of no return. At the end of the talk, I kind of want to do a little bit of misdirection and make it seem like this thing was gone, that this mural was destroyed. And I specifically, my pitch to him was, and again, this is just an idea I generated walking around town, that I'll say that this whole experience gave me a whole series of what ifs. You know, what if I could have figured out who owned that restaurant? And what if I could have reached out and contacted them? And what if I could have just walked into that restaurant and somehow peeled that mural right off the wall and just walked out with it in the middle of the day? And what if everything that I just said is exactly what happened? And then we somehow reveal it. I thought it would sort of come down from the ceiling. That turned out to be really complicated. So we figured out that we could just hang it there and cover it up with the screen and then retract the screen at the last minute. And Andy was just like, yep, good. Okay, let's go. That sounds great. Like, he was immediately on board 100% with that idea.
I just want to suggest, as an audience member, the way this was staged was there was a projection screen, and then behind it was some kind of scaffolding that was holding up the mural. So you couldn't see from the audience side that there was anything back there, because there's just random scaffolding on a stage in general. And so the moment that the projection screen begins to rise, you realize the murderer has been in the room the whole festival, like the whole day or something.
If you had dropped it down, it wouldn't have been as effective.
I agree with you. I agree.
Because you're like, wait, it's physically been behind you.
Yeah.
And that was such a freak out.
Yeah.
Like, there was a lot of like, wait, no, because the moment you showed the under construction photo, the reaction around me was like, because you know immediately that this is the destruction of the art, you know?
You brought your audience through that loss.
I'm really glad that I was able to pull that off. Thank you for talking about this right now, because it brings me a lot of delight that worked. I don't think I had a lot of high hopes that I have a lot of fantasies all day long. I do a lot of daydreaming, like as a human being. I'm just constantly daydreaming, and I'm often daydreaming about things like that. Or if we're starting to work on a new idea for something, I will daydream about how we introduce it, or daydream about like presenting it to a group of people and how could I surprise them and how would that feel? And my motivation is almost always wanting people just to feel a delight or like I'm the guy that like at the dumb whatever show at the theme park, like when the confetti cannon goes off, I'm like, whoa, cool, confetti cannon. Like I'm hyped by things like that. They just bring me a little bit of happiness. I just fantasize about being able to provide those moments for other people. And so this was a time when I somehow managed to make that work. And I was incredibly nervous about the tech person not hitting the button or hitting the button at the wrong time. I had 5 blank slides and then a bunch of slides of the removal. In case it didn't work at all, I could like flip through really quick and show that I was able to take the mural off the wall as like a backup plan. So I was like sweating it big time.
Chris, I can't imagine what it was like to be in the audience, because I feel like I got all of the impact that we're talking about just from watching the video. And in fact, was trying to explain it and get Catherine to watch it. And a video of my former boss talking about McDonald's is a little bit of a hard sell, especially it's like 20 minutes, I think, or something.
And, you know,
she's like, I've got work to do. Like, you know, like the rent's got to get paid. And I'm like, no, just sit down and watch this, please. And I remember, I mean, it leveled her. I sent Cable a video of her just weeping. Like, it's just like, because there's something about that story of both saving it, but also the diving in and finding Wes Cook and finding the human part of it. Like, McDonald's is not supposed to be, we're not supposed to know who Wes Cook is via McDonald's rule set that they're imposing on us.
So as a side note, I hope this doesn't make me seem like a psychotic schemer or whatever, but when I never wrote anything for this talk. I never wrote anything down. I didn't even write down an outline. I just worked it over and over and over and over again in my head, over and over and over and over again. And when I made myself cry practicing it, I was like, okay, I think I'm onto something here. Like, make a note of that. And it's not like I'm like, yeah, I can mess everybody up. But to me, it was like, I found something interesting and it felt interesting. I don't know. It's maybe a weird thing to admit, but.
Yeah, but I mean, in my art, that is the thing. I am trying to break your heart, but then I'm trying to give you a reason to live. I'm trying to do both of those things because those are the same thing, essentially. And so the fact that you went on a journey and there was a thing there. One thing to know if you watch the video is they've reduced the time it takes to lift. It was really slow.
Yeah.
So there's like an extra, I don't know, 20 seconds.
Yes.
So it's such a long time of not being able to see what's behind the thing.
Oh, wow.
And so people are like, what's going to be behind there? Is it going to be a blank thing? Is it going to be ripped in half? Like, what's going on? And so, yeah, I was in the second row. I have photos of this, Cable. I was taking photos the whole time of the rays.
Oh, I would like to see that. Yeah.
I'm right behind Amy. So it's just
amazing.
Like, and she was losing it. Like, everybody was just pretty much losing it. Yeah.
And same thing as when I was walking out with it. At that point, I did my job and I physically didn't know what to do with my body. I'm like, do I wave? Do I bow? Should I just run? I hadn't thought it through at all.
The daydream stopped at that point.
No,
you hadn't thought anymore past that. Yeah.
I don't care about
it's the rest. It's a good note. Next time you start daydreaming, think about the exit. Just add a couple more moments to the daydream.
I'm really happy to hear that people felt it the same way that I felt it, which is nice. It's nice to go through something like that, connect it with feelings, and then be able to share those feelings with other people. Maybe this is why people are actors. There's probably a thing here that could be a career, but not for me. But just really quickly, just so you know how that actually happened, I did get an email from the franchise owner, and I connected with the franchise owner because there was a sign on the wall. This franchise owned by name of franchisee, which I thought was super cool. And I found them on Facebook, I think, and the only time I've logged into Facebook, and sent them a message and didn't really hear anything back ever. I maybe sent 1 or 2 messages because Brian put the fear of Vision 2020 in me. And then I really did get the email maybe 2 days before the construction was supposed to begin. And she was so cool about it. And her only request was that I donate whatever I felt was appropriate to a charity that she runs that I guess does playgrounds for children or whatever. And I was like,
wonderful.
That sounds totally reasonable to me. So I drove up with Mike, Greg Maletic from Panic, and my dad, which was the best. And we had crowbars and we had no idea what we were going to find.
You didn't know how it was mounted or what it was?
Nothing.
Was it painted directly onto the wall? Are you taking sheetrock home?
Unclear. Exactly. I told myself we're just going to drive up and investigate this situation because this may or may not be possible. So we got up there. The restaurant's fully open. A guy's eating a burger right next to me as I'm standing on a ladder with a crowbar popping off all the chrome. And he's just like, just didn't even ask me what I'm doing. No question at all. This guy's tearing apart the restaurant next to him. So I popped off all the trim, the wooden trim. And then it became clear that it was a piece of fabric on the wall, which I thought it was maybe painted directly onto drywall. Never occurred to me. In hindsight, of course, they would do it on canvas and ship it to the store, right? Didn't even occur to me that it might be anything other than that. So we had to take down the Nintendo 64s in order to get at it. And I think we had done that earlier to take the pictures, which was the first thing. And then I just picked at a corner of it and then just kind of pulled on it. And it kind of pulled a little bit. And then I kind of kept going. And against all logic and reason, it just cleanly peeled off the wall in one piece. It didn't rip. It didn't tear. The adhesive wasn't too strong in certain points. There's a couple chunks of drywall, maybe just the front facing part. Me and my dad and Greg just sort of peeled this enormous, Mike, you know how I love to remove a piece of plastic from a new electronic. It was that, but with this incredible mural on the wall of a McDonald's. I've maybe never been happier in my life. And it just, and I'll send you a couple of pictures. I have a couple of pictures and a couple of video that people have not seen. Yeah.
It's to remove it. You're then obviously thinking about how it was put up, and you're thinking was it? Mm-hmm. It was obviously then you assume it's painted in Los Angeles and shipped 100%. Up, and there's all these aspects of it as it becomes physical and real that are so strange. And the fact that they just slapped it up with some adhesive,
slapped it up, and then after we pulled it off, written on the wall in pencil were the words, "Coming soon." So obviously the mural didn't make it for opening day, but there's this big frame and they were like, what do we do? So I have a picture of that too that I can send you. It's just incredible. My dad and Greg and I were just in disbelief. There are so many ways that could have gone sideways and it would have just been destroyed.
So then you just rolled it up, put it in the car,
drove
fit between the seats, and
exactly 100% correct.
Wow.
How is that possible? Anyways, it was a magical moment for sure. The fates were aligned on that day.
And when was this? What year was this that you got it?
Oh, many years ago. Many years ago. I kind of, let me see what I can find.
Because I'm just curious how long you had it, and then where was it, and who saw it, if anyone?
For the purposes of my talk, I kind of blurred time and date because really there were enormous stretches of time between many of these events, and who cares? So it lived in the office for a while. And then, I have a picture of everybody staring at it unrolled in the office. And then it lived in my basement up until the talk. Now it lives in the new office, which I hope you can come see. And there's a exhibit room in the new office that I'm hoping to display it and some other stuff, and then invite everybody over to come see the mural in person for their own 2 eyes for a bit of a showing.
I'll be there.
Yeah, please come. One other story that I didn't get to tell, which I think you'll find very fascinating and delightful. In talking with the franchise owner, who again, super nice, I noticed that so the mural again is a beautiful farm scene, and the sort of centerpiece of the mural is Ronald McDonald milking a cow. Mm-hmm. I noticed that the paint sort of let's just call it the milking zone. I'll never use that phrase again. The paint in that area looked a little different or worn down. And I was like, what's up with that? And she's like, oh, there's a story there. I'm like, well, you got to tell me. Apparently, a customer was in the restaurant with her daughter, and they were seated directly next to the mural. And as they were eating their meal and they looked closely at the mural, they became convinced that what was painted was not an udder, but maybe similar in shape and form. I don't want to talk about this. And they were livid. They thought somebody did a little prank on this mural and snuck this through. Now, here's the thing. In any other circumstance, I would say this person is maybe out of their minds. However, if I really think about Wes Cook and his sense of humor and his streak for subversive acts, there is at least a 25% chance that he maybe added a little extra detail to the udder that non-uttered it. And the milk is just, and so she said that this customer was so mad that they sued the restaurant about that the daughter was traumatized by this whole event, and they solved the situation. I don't know if they settled. I don't know if they threatened to sue. I don't know if it was an actual lawsuit.
We have to find this young woman, grown up now.
Yeah.
The solution was that the franchise owner found a local artist in Centralia, Washington, who modified that area of the mural to make it not as troublesome. Now, I love the story so much, but you also can understand why I did not put this in my talk, because it really veers into a whole nother kettle of fish. But it's fascinating, right? So somebody just smelled dollars, or was it real? Did he really get...
Well, yeah, because if you look at westcook.art, there's some, like the thing with the internal design.
Yeah.
Where there's some stuff going on there. Yeah.
There's more that I have not scanned. He drew later in life, a lot of like Greek mythological creatures. There's some centaurs, whatever, and they just absolutely have penises. Like I don't know if that word is spoken on your podcast.
Absolutely.
But there's so God bless him. He is who he is, and this is his art. And so I love that story. I don't think it's for everyone, but it's definitely appropriate for this podcast.
Wow.
The intersection of owning a business and displaying art and interacting with customers and lawsuits and
And there's a reason McDonald's doesn't do it anymore.
And there's a reason McDonald's maybe doesn't do it anymore. I wish I had a picture of the original version so bad. All I have is the worn down modified udder. But thank you for
Now, have you asked the restoration people if they can remove?
I think they may be removed. I mean, they almost took it down to canvas.
Okay.
And then maybe built it back up again. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But like, I do have his pencil sketch.
So you could like forensically kind of...
Yeah, I don't think the pencil sketch, but I mean, again, who's to say? It reminds me a little bit of the infamous McDonald's coffee lawsuit, which everyone interpreted as this person is crazy and they just wanted money. Of course, coffee is hot, but it actually, maybe you've talked about this. It turns out actually it was a serious problem.
Yeah.
I'm keeping an open mind here. This person maybe saw an opportunity to, and it was ridiculous, or there really was something going on.
Well, it wasn't crazy enough that they just said, no, go home.
Right. Right.
They must have a little bit seen it too.
There has to be. Yeah, I that's an extremely good point, because that is by far the easiest answer. What are you talking about?
Isn't there a famous Disney cover art?
Oh,
that
The Little Mermaid.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Like this is in the, maybe it's just, it was around that time.
People
I
see a
know,
lot of
maybe, yeah.
See a lot of them. Anyways,
There's nothing that McDonald's doesn't touch.
sometimes, Mike, I think about, do you remember the pita pit by the old office that was not there for very long? Pita pit. Zach, Chris, any recognition on what a pita pit is?
The name sounds familiar.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, like a real college town kind of pita restaurant. And I went there.
Yeah. Aimed at my pita eating interests. Yeah. Right.
That is one of my favorite websites, by the way, mypitaeatinginterest.com. Went to Pita Pit, 2 notorious challenges for me at Pita Pit. One, I ordered a sandwich with barbecue sauce, and they actually removed the barbecue sauce from the freezer, and it was actively ice cold on top of the hot pita. Totally horrible. But my second, more favorite drink-related Pita Pit story is that I went in there and I ordered my pita sandwich, and I said, and I'd like a Diet Coke. And the guy's like, oh, okay, so I need you to know that Diet Coke has basically formaldehyde in it. And so when you drink a Diet Coke, you are essentially embalming yourself from the inside.
I wish.
So you really need to know that. And there was like this incredible 5-second beat of silence. And I was like, yeah, anyways, I'd like a Diet Coke. And he looked like I thought he was going to die, but he still had to hand me the Diet Coke. And I think about that every time I get a Diet Coke, basically. Anyways, that's my Pita Pit story.
That guy's a listener. We're going to get a lot of emails after this.
I just delicious taste of embalming yourself from the inside.
Are you still a big Diet Coke drinker?
Unfortunately, yes. I dropped it for a while, a number of years. No caffeinated beverages at all, because I was convinced when I was jogging, it was like swirling around and giving me heartburn or something. I was like, I can't do that anymore. And my brain just turned it off. And then the pandemic came and I'm like, oh man, give me a Diet Coke.
Mm-hmm. The warm embrace.
Yeah, that's all I had.
The warm embrace of death from the inside.
You're embalming yourself just in case you get COVID.
I'm saving a lot of money on funeral expenses.
Yeah.
Anyways. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Cable.
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you, Cable.
Thank you so much.
People on the internet who want to go look at your stuff, where do they go?
Well, first, definitely please look at Wes Cook's art at wescook.art. I just realized I should have said that in the beginning, because without having seen the talk, you can still look at the mural. The mural is front and center, and you can see what it looks like up close. And then I have a personal blog that I, like all personal blogs, I need to post to more often, but that is at cable.com, and that is spelled CABEL.com.
And if you dig through the archives, you actually do have a great post about the mall in there.
I do.
And then the last but not least,
Panic.com? Yeah, who could forget? Which is great if you're looking for Mac software or video games or handheld video game systems like Playdate. Very confusing company to explain to anyone, but it's the company we have. So, yeah. And I hope that you can all join me for the Wes Cook mural exhibition sometime, maybe, let's say Q1 next year. Why not? Let's set a goal.
Wow.
Nice.
sounds great.
Hamburger Business Review is an independent production, and you can become a supporter at hamburgerbusinessreview.com. You can also buy some merch there, leave a comment, make suggestions, and sign up for the accompanying email newsletter. That is hamburgerbusinessreview.com.
And please, please, please go and watch Cable's talk. It's absolutely amazing, and you will probably cry. We're listing that in the show notes, but yeah, just go to westcook.art. And also, please rate and review this podcast. It helps other people find us and get into the hamburger business.
And with that, season 2 of Hamburger Business Review is coming to a close. Visit hamburgerbusinessreview.com and sign up for that email newsletter. In so doing, you'll be the first to know about special episodes, extra features, or the beginning of season 3.
I'm Mike Merrill.
I'm Zach Rose.
And I'm Chris Higgins. Our theme music is from Jonna Bechtolt's Jazz Around. Our social media manager is Colette Wacker, and our graphic designer is Chris Snap. Thanks for listening.
I'm going to miss you guys.
Aw. Me too. You gotta say your line, though.
Oh, wait, what's my line?
Unless you two choked up.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
I forgot that I had another line.